r/NoSleep. Posted by u/horrorconnoisseur. We got a new principal. He made a strange set of rules. Journal entry, Day 1. I went to a remotely normal school. We had normal teachers, normal students, normal janitors. Everything you could think of about this school was as average and as basic as can be. At times it got dry, repetitive, and boring, but that was just how high school is, dry, repetitive, and boring. What especially stood out to me and other students was the principal. She was beloved upon each and every one of the students. She was extremely kind, laid back, and a funny person. She always went out of her way for anyone who needed help, and calls to the principal's office weren't seen as daunting or frightening, but rather something that could relate to the feeling of talking to your mother about losing your sweatshirt, or forgetting to clean your room. It felt more of a conversation than a show of authority. I had a couple encounters with her, and all were as pleasant as everyone else's. I tripped one day in the hall with all my things, and without hesitation she leapt into action and asked if I was okay whilst helping me pick up my belongings. We shared a very nice conversation, and from that moment on it felt as though every time I saw her it was like eating the warm chocolate chip cookies your grandma makes for you. I learned she was very financially stable, and yes, she felt that close to her students that she would share details such as those. Being a principal was her dream job, she loved every part of it, and she felt an emotional connection to all her students. All pros and no cons, she said to me one time when conversing to her about her job and life in general. She was such a passionate and cheery person. So when she unexpectedly left her position as the principal and moved out of state, you could imagine the sheer confusion and sadness brought upon the school body. Why would she leave? She loved her job here, and that's so strange. Were phrases you would hear hundreds of times whilst walking through the halls of the school. I myself was just as confused. It made no sense at the time, thinking that such a loving principal that loved her job more than anything else would just leave with no words or goodbyes. Especially since she formed so many friendships with the students. Without question, the very next day after the strange disappearance, a new principal took the role. His name was Mr. Redacted. Now Mr. Redacted was an average-heighted man, around 5 feet 8 inches with streaks of white in his silvery gray hair. He looked around 60 or so, and always walked around with a cane. Most students that are left can attest to this sort of eerie feeling he gave off, a feeling of dread and fear. The bus ride to the school was normal, and walking into school was the same, aside from the sense of loss and longingness everyone felt for the past principal. It was not until the morning announcements that everything changed. We all sat down in our first period classes, awaiting the morning announcements that no one really paid any attention to if we were being honest. We were expecting the same old greeting and boring information we never indulged in. We heard the static from the speakers as the principal picked up the announcement phone. "Good morning students, and welcome to school. Fine day today, isn't it?" An awkward pause arose after he asked a question no one was near enough to answer. "Well anyways, I am the new principal Mr. Redacted." I could tell he was saying this with a menacing grin on his face. It made me uneasy. Things will be working slightly differently around here. To ensure your safety of the different workings of this school, I've made a list of rules that you need to follow. As I looked around the room I could tell people were confused. Nonetheless everyone stayed quiet, as he started to explain each strange and confusing rule in detail. Rule 1, if at any times you see the janitor mopping the floor with nothing in his hands, keep your head down to the ground and ignore him at all costs. Rule 2, every week on a random day there will be a code red drill. You must turn off all lights, lock the door, and hide silently in the room. If you don't, it will enter the room. Do not leave the room until I come on to the announcements and say yellow roses shine brightly in the moonlight. If I say anything else, unlock the window and flee the school, and don't look back under any circumstances. Rule 3, if the lunch lady tries to give you food that isn't on the menu for the given day, politely refuse and ask for the real lunch. She will try to persuade you, but if you keep asking, she will comply. Rule 4, if at any time on campus you see the old principal, do not talk or look at her and run to my office immediately and report it to me. I will then give you further instructions. Rule 5, if at any times the teacher stops speaking and faces the whiteboard, immediately put your heads down on your desk and don't make a noise until the teacher speaks again. Rule 6, redacted. Rule 7, never disobey Rule 6. Rule 8, if the lights start to flicker, immediately go into code red protocols. Do not leave the room until I come on to the announcements and say yellow roses shine brightly in the moonlight. If I say anything else, unlock the window and flee the school, and don't look back under any circumstances. And most importantly, Rule 10. Never leave the school until it is exactly 3 p.m., otherwise, you'll surely encounter it. This concludes the announcements for today. I was insanely confused, and honestly quite scared. What are these strange rules? What is it? Who is this guy? My mind was racing, and I could even see the panic in my teacher's eyes. He got up in front of the class and tried to calm us down, saying things like, "I'm sure this is just some twisted joke, don't freak out." Nonetheless, we all freaked out for a while, but then just decided to proceed with the class since nothing out of the ordinary was happening, and we presumed it to be a sick joke. It was math class, and the teacher started his basic lecture. It was over quadratic equations. I zoned out and didn't pay much attention, but I remember what he said leading up to the first tragedy. "So when you have this situation, you have to," he cut out. He didn't say a word and dropped his dry erase marker, and just stared into space at the blank whiteboard. I just then recalled, Rule 5, if at any times the teacher stops speaking and faces the whiteboard, immediately put your heads down on your desk and don't make a noise until the teacher speaks again. I decided to play it safe. I put my head down on my desk and held my breath. I didn't want to take any chances as I was already freaked out. I heard a student say, "Sir, are you okay?" I felt an ominous feeling as I heard utter silence. I heard a girl quietly sobbing in the back of the room, presumably from this dreading feeling I and probably everyone else was feeling. This went on for multiple seconds, the only sound being the ticking of the clock. Tick. Tock. Tick. Tock. I decided to slightly peek out of my elbow out of curiosity. How I wish I could say I never did. I saw the teacher still staring at the whiteboard, and he did something I am still scarred about to this day. His head turned around 180 degrees quicker than light. You could hear the cracking of his neck as he did so. His eyes turned a demonic red. I heard a scream to my right, and in the most devilish voice the teacher said, "No talking in the class," and leapt at the screaming kid. I closed my eyes. All I heard was the animalistic screams of the now demon teacher and the kid facing his last moments on earth. More kids screamed. More corpses filled the class. I couldn't help but shedding multiple tears. Each tear representing the fear of mankind, the fear of humans against a force that is beyond them. We all knew we were the prey of this thing. I couldn't do anything but hold my breath and pray ever so desperately. After what felt like hours, it finally stopped, and the teacher continued his lecture like nothing ever happened. I cautiously lifted my head to a horrific sight. Multiple bodies, lifeless. No blood. Just pale, limp, lifeless bodies. About half the class was like this. I sobbed. One kid threw up all over his desk. Another girl screamed and cried louder than any sound I've heard in my life. I stared in shock as the teacher continued his lesson, unfazed by anything, almost in a trance-like state. After that, time was distorted. I lost grip of reality the last half of the class, and honestly, I couldn't tell you what happened that first period besides that. So my memory drifts only to the next period. Everyone walking silently, crying, or throwing up from the trauma in the halls. I came to the conclusion it must have happened to everyone. Just then, I saw the janitor walking down the hallway. I started running towards him. I practically screamed what happened and that we needed help, and I frantically spat out my whole mind. My heart stopped. He wasn't looking at me or paying attention to my existence. He was mopping, without a mop. Rule 1, if at any times you see the janitor mopping the floor with nothing in his hands, keep your head down to the ground and ignore him at all costs. He slowly looked up at me, his eyes turned that same demonic red of the teacher. And in the same demonic voice, he said, "Don't talk to me," and started running towards me at inhuman speed. My heart and body took over from there. I sprinted like my life depended on it, because in that moment, I truly thought it did. I heard the footsteps get closer and closer, but then I heard them stop. Weird, I thought, it sounded like he was right behind me. Now what may have been the most horrific part of this whole day, was when I heard a scurrying noise above me. I looked up, and there he was, the janitor. His whole body contorted in the most disgusting and creature-like way I could imagine. His feet and hands were flat against the ceiling. His claw-like finger digging into the ceiling as he crawls along above me. His head turned 180 degrees as I looked up so he could have a full view of me. I didn't know what to do, or how to react. To my horror, I saw him let go of the ceiling, falling towards me. This is the end, I thought. I was going to die by a demon janitor. My body refused. It felt like minutes as he fell towards me, but I mustered up the last ounce of willingness left in me, and managed to narrowly move out of the way. He hit the ground with a decent amount of force. Clearly I heard bones break. He slowly stood up. With each inch he rose, a bone horrifically snapped back into place, decontorting his body from the damage of the fall. I didn't stick around to watch the show. I sprinting out of there with more speed than I thought I ever could physically be capable of. I ran into the nearest bathroom and almost broke the stall as I ran inside it and slammed the door so hard. Without hesitation I whipped out my phone. I can't call the cops. They won't believe me. They wouldn't be able to handle this anyways. So I ask anyone, no, I beg anyone to send anyone who can possibly help me and everyone else in this school. I go to, redacted, high school. I think I lost the janitor, but I have to go now. The lights just started to flicker,